Dark Soul 9669 Super saying, I find it really disingenuous with the concept of not touching my content for Mythic Raid and Mythic Plus. Their inclusion already removed my content with challenge modes and Heroic 10 to 25 being peak, screwed my roster at the end of MOP. That's a funny one. Anytime something is a fundamental gameplay format change, some people are going to be winners, some people are going to be losers. And this kind of goes to... Heroic 10 being a thing, back of course when Heroic is the hardest thing in the game, it meant that if you were a guild that was only doing 10-man raiding, which my guild was, then, okay, kill Lei Shen. All right, let's try Jinrock and Horadon on Heroic. And like, yeah, sure, maybe the council fight was way harder in 10-man, because the whole thing with Throne of Thunder, it was overtuned in 10 for like the first few weeks. I very keenly remember that going on. But we have the option, right? And then as soon as Mythic 20 comes out, now there is no feasible way for a subsection of the WoW player base to engage in that style of difficult content without changing their fundamental social format. Yeah. Even though, yes, Heroic 10 and Heroic 25 were very different modes. 25 was like typically the one that was taken the most seriously, but it's just an interesting thing in terms of gameplay format. The same way if you really enjoyed those challenge modes. I mean, I remember like the challenge mode rewards in WoD were really cool. I have the Hunter challenge mode set from MOP. Those were awesome. But, yeah, they don't exist anymore. And then it's kind of tricky because if we change up Mythic Raiding, if we change up Mythic Plus, there's loads of people who, for whom those are now like the pillars of the game. And that's what's really challenging about an MMO.
Yeah, it's really hard to like actually solve because... There's so many problems where, like, you look at the flex system and that's done so much good, right? It's done so much good for, we have 10 people doing Heroic. 11th just logged on. All right, let's go. But it feels like that came at the cost of completely destroying so many rosters.
Yeah.
And so many, like, ways to move up. And you can't make Mythic scalable, otherwise you destroy Mythic. Basically. There's maybe a way you could maybe have it flex within a point, but because people want to do the best, they'll find the best skill point there and do it that way. So that's why it needs to stay that way. So it's almost as if they would need to go back in time and go, okay, instead of adding a flex difficulty mode and then making sure everything flexes, I guess they would almost need to do something else there. Something else completely and entirely. Where it's like, if someone logs in for a raid night and they're 11 and 10's already there, you need a way for 11 not to feel left out.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you physically do that outside of... Make it so... I don't know. I guess you'd want to reduce the barrier to raiding and reduce the amount of time it takes and then introduce some element of replayability. So then, they kind of go through in 10 and then one of them goes, I'll set out next week and let number 11 take the spot. And then that's kind of a little less stakes involved, so more freedom and kind of more, hey, we can do whatever we want and this is fine. But then I don't know if that would particularly work. Or maybe you have like a different activity that's flexible. And that's like hey, whoever logs on, we just play this flexible activity together. Versus, there's 10 of us today, let's go raid. So I don't know. I'd love to see, like we're saying with Azeroth with Murlocs, I'd love to see a different branching path in time where they went, fuck it, everything's 10 man. Because I have a funny feeling that would be a substantially healthier rating base. Probably a lot of damage done in the meantime.
Yeah. That would be fascinating. Yeah. That would be fascinating. Right, so an orange sea lion. Super saying, Matt hit the nail on the head. I can't stand Mythic Plus, so I don't play retail. It just feels so much like WoW Diablo. If I wanted rifts, I'd play Diablo. And it's like, what is the thing that does that? It's the time pressure. And the time pressure just completely changes the texture of the content, and there you go. Mm-hmm. Once it's like that, you can't really undo it. So I wonder. I've long wondered what a no timer, this is one of the supers from earlier, what a no timer, like, hey, we're going to make this dungeon feel like a heroic raid. Like, just things are harder, every boss has an extra mechanic. This is a true major challenge for 5 players that will drop incredibly strong gear, and it has a weekly lockout. Basically like a mega dungeon. Maybe the idea that you could have a mega dungeon come out with a normal mode and a heroic mode, or maybe a heroic mode and a mythic mode or something, with the idea being that like that mythic mega dungeon will legit be like maybe in difficulty somewhere between heroic and mythic, or as hard as they feel they can make a piece of 5-player content. I've always wondered what that would be like, because I think it could be a really fun challenge, but only in the context where it can be a wipe fest. That's the thing. Like, a really hard boss that's a wipe fest feels like good and fun, and that's what raiders do. That's what we like. But you can't experience that in a hard dungeon in WoW unless you have decently low gear and you're doing a new mega dungeon, and I suppose that's only really applicable, for a few months of an expansion. Whereas, yeah, like... In Mythic Plus, you cannot have a boss be like that because it completely destroys the timer. And I wonder how much that limits what they can do with bosses. Just food for thought.
I think massively. Yeah. Because even with timers, you can't even have bosses that have like substantial down phases without working that into the timer. And then that gets a bit weird and confusing, and people probably don't like it having like downtime and stuff like that. Whereas that's like a really important part to overall boss fight flow of, the boss has jumped away or the boss is shielded. Something, again, I've also learned in Mini Healer, where that's like a really interesting thing, where it's like, yeah, you're not doing any damage for a bit, but you still have to do other things. That's like kind of, that turns into I need to speedrun this mechanic, which is kind of like a bit shitty versus solve it properly. And time pressure is just a little bit kind of, feels cheap in so many ways.
Yeah. Well, to hit another dimension of that from Chronic Love, I can time plus 20 keys, but because I don't have the time to Mythic Raid, I'm stuck with suboptimal gear. Also don't like the fewer new dungeons to keep the old ones. I think they're referring to the idea that this is a bit weird in Season 1 of Dragonflight. So Dragonflight ships with 8 dungeons. Only 4 of them will be Mythic Plus in Season 1, and then 4 returning dungeons in the past will be part of the Mythic Plus pool. And I think the big question there is, like, a Legion dungeon being a part of Mythic Plus makes sense. Those Legion dungeons shipped with Mythic Plus. But Mists of Pandaria dungeon, interesting. That was made during a different era. But at least I can say from personal experience that those were really fun on challenge mode. So yeah, there is that, and it's a bit weird because like in the long term, it does mean that the Mythic Plus loot pool will be completely different between every single season. So you're not just, re-grinding an item you already have, but at a higher item level. But I feel like these are benefits that we're not going to feel right now. The only thing we could feel right now is just the weird idea that the expansion comes with 8 dungeons, but when it comes out, I can only do 4 of them in the mode that's relevant. Because what happens if what happens if you go and let's just say life builds you really enjoy, and life builds is like your Maw of Souls or something, or your Dark Heart Thicket, where you're happy to just do a whole bunch of them, but then it's not there in the next season. Yeah. And whatever it's replaced, well, I suppose Blizzard would, if they were replacing a life pools, they would almost certainly want to have a fast dungeon in the new roster.
Yeah, but it's certainly put fucking tunes, I think.
Yeah, it's certainly a new design space that they're entering. That's for sure. Yeah, and then the thing of gear viability, that's always been an interesting one. I've personally, I am a fan of like, look, if there's a way for raid gear to be best in raid, Mythic Plus gear to be best in Mythic Plus, PvP gear to be best in PvP, which already exists, I'd be okay with that. I wouldn't feel threatened by that. In fact, if Mythic Plus gear was just better for Mythic Plus and maybe not so good for Raid, I'd almost even prefer that because I'd have less friggin' pressure.
Well, that's exactly the thing. They need to do that. There is no ifs and buts about it. For like for these pillars to remain separate and people to like with limited time to enjoy the game, they fucking have to. Because the only other thing is at the minute you just Mythic Plus until you die, and then you go Mythic Raid because there's no point doing anything else. Basically, a lot of the time. Obviously, if you're like in a really good guild who'll just smash heroic, then it's efficient. But generally speaking, there's so little point, and it's like these things are like standing all over each other and cannibalizing each other. And I don't really believe too much in content cannibalizing other content most of the time. But I've seen it and felt it so much that like I would like to raid a lot more often. I don't even mind like pugs going pretty bad in heroic, but it's just to me the entire time like this is such a fucking drastic waste of my time, because the way for me to spend my time to achieve the goals that the game has set out for me, which is generally speaking the goals you're going to want to achieve, is to just fucking smash my head against the Mythic Plus wall all day long.
And here is where there's a super from Thomas, which is tackling the exact same thing that you've said, but from a very different angle, because Thomas supered, thank you, saying, personally, I see the changes done to Mythic Plus since Legion have been beneficial. As a heroic raider, I have access to Mythic tier loot without needing to raid Mythic.
Yeah, but why is that beneficial to you if you're not raiding Mythic? What do you need Mythic gear for?
Because it'll, I suppose, be better for Heroic. Or because it's a reward, it's a tier of reward that you could not get before, and now it feels like an upgrade that you can. But then for some other people, the fact that you can do that means that now it's a new thing that they feel like they have to do. And I guess that's the problem of having these parallel forms of gearing that cross over so much.
Yeah.
And I think from Blizzard's perspective, obviously PvP gear doesn't cross over because it's only really at its super high item level within PvP. Because they know that like a raider maybe will hate doing PvP, but will be more likely to enjoy a dungeon. So I suppose for Blizzard, like, do they see it as raiders doing both?
Well, they clearly are, because that's what people do. Some people Mythic raid and don't do, and only do Mythic Plus for the gear. Other people, you know, do both. Some people just push M plus keys and don't Mythic raid unless they need a specific bit of gear. And I think that is such like a minority class of player that it's like,
Is it? Because that's like that's going to be a lot of people who are actually playing the game right now, though. Maybe it's a minority in comparison to like a headcanon of the overall group of people that are interested in WoW. But I wonder what it is to the groups of people who play WoW.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing, right? They've designed the game for that player. They designed the game for that player, not designed the game for other players. So those are the players they have left, but they clearly want the other players, but they have to get them back, which means they have to change what they're doing. Otherwise, they'll just continue to go down the thing. I highly doubt most have the time to do both M plus and raid. And that's the thing where then you get a different class of player that's allowed to play World of Warcraft in a way that like the goals of the game align with you, which is people who mono game the shit out of that 6 hours a day. Obviously, you don't need to do 6 hours a day. You can be relatively time efficient, but it's like, it's just not really, it is just takes a lot of time to play the game. And this, like, especially now, I'm trying to like play only a couple hours a week. Fuck me, like,
well,
the game is basically unplayable to me at this point.
If Mythic Plus didn't have depletion, and like, there's probably targeted fixes to a bunch of this stuff. Yeah. Maybe a situation where they try to make it so the raid gear is best for raiding, the PV, or you know, the Mythic Plus gear is best for Mythic Plus. Maybe they could do that via set bonus if they really wanted to.